So thanks to everyone for coming along. Wonderful, wonderful turnout. And deservedly so, because this is a fantastic exhibition. Doesn't it make your adrenaline, doesn't it do something to you? It's fantastic. I mean, so who here went to Victoria Park in 1978? Hands up.
Blimey.
Possibly. Well, that's good. I mean, what a momentous occasion. And Fergus Lee Park. We'll come on to that one. Equally important. 42 buses from Glasgow went down to that event, I am told. Unfortunately, I missed that one. So, momentous occasion all round. But this isn't about looking back. This is very much now, and it just feels a very particularly relevant time to have this exhibition on, because it's a celebration as well as a yes-saying, if you like. So just a few words of introduction. In the foyer of Trongate 103, you'll see a lot of graphic work, covers of temporary hoarding, posters that were done for the RAR Carnivals. Syd was very much involved in the design of that work, but there's a lot of other material. On the left-hand side, you've got some photographs and posters relating to Rock Against Racism Scotland, largely Edinburgh, who were particularly active in that movement at the time. There's two tables through the back which has some other memorabilia relating to Scottish Rock Against Racism, including a poster of the Fergus Lee Park event. But the guy who sent that, it's really interesting, tracking people down, or people coming forward and saying, I've got this or I've got that. And as someone was saying to me a wee while ago, that's one thing, but getting it actually off them is another. The guy had found the poster for Fergus Lee Park, and he'd snapped it on his phone, and then he lost the poster.
Wasn't it called the Deal with it?
It was. And he was also at Victoria Park. There's a couple of photographs of Paisley punks going to Victoria Park through there as well. So, just an announcement, on the 1st of April we've got another event on, which is a series of presentations from people who were involved in RAR gigs at the time. There's information available on that. That includes Ken McCluskey, who was in a band called Raw Deal before they became the Bluebells. John Marr, who is the drummer, still is when they play occasionally in the Buzzcocks. Tam Dean Byrne, who's an actor and activist. And then there's a number of other people who are involved in organisations that provide some continuity between RAR when it began and current anti-racist activity, such as Unite Against Fascism, Love Music, Hate Racism, STUC, as well as the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights. So without further ado, wonderful to have Syd and Carol come up all the way from the south coast of England. Where do you live again?
Who?
Where?
Who?
Who? You live in who? Used to live in London, and prior to that, other places too. Carol was a co-curator of this exhibition with Mark Celia Autograph, which is the Association of Black Photographers, who we've worked with a couple of times. We'll hear a lot from Syd. We're going to start in here and then we'll move through next door. Lots of stories to tell. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. Carol is the author of The Birth of Cool. She's a lecturer at the University of the Arts in London. You can fill us in on any other details as you see fit, Carol. But Carol will introduce us to how this kind of came about.
Hello everyone, it's a fantastic turnout. I'm just going to talk really briefly. I, as well as being an academic and writing, I do like curating exhibitions, and I was doing an exhibition around Black British style at the Victoria and Albert Museum. That was around 2003, 2004. So Syd sent me an email of an image which is in the other room of a group of black lads jumping up to gig with a specials gig in Leeds in 79. So I emailed
81.
71.
81.
81, beg pardon. And so I emailed back and I said, whose photograph is this? Where did you get it from? And he emailed back and it said it's one of mine. I went, what is wrong with this man? So I had no idea that he had all these images. And after I finished the Black British Style exhibition, I started asking him, to look at all this other material, because I should say we are a couple. Syd's my husband, but all his material was at his studio. So I got Syd to pull together about 25 images. So there was a mixture of gigs, of the demonstrations, but also portraits. So a real mix of different genres of photography, if you like. And decided to take them around galleries to see if anyone would be interested. And each place I went to, they said, yeah, these are really interesting, but you can't show gig images alongside demonstrations, alongside portraits. They'd have to be separate. And I thought, no, this all tells the same story. So I kind of left it for a while. And then in around 2007, Donald Smith, who's director of Chelsea Space, it's a gallery at Chelsea College of Art, said I'd got the gallery and I could do anything I wanted, so I wanted to do this exhibition. So we took that set of photographs to Donald and we just let him look through the portfolio. We didn't say a word, we didn't do an introduction, we just wanted him to look at the images, and he was really quiet and he didn't say a word, and Syd and I started looking at each other and thinking, God, he hates it. And then he got to the end and he said, I went to that gig and that gig, and it was kind of telling the story of his early teenage, youthful life and activist life. And he said, yeah, you've got that space. So we decided to do photographs, and we did other archival material with posters, Syd and Ruth's diaries. So it was a kind of a sort of autobiographical exhibition of their activist lives, of graphic design of raw. And that was in Chelsea Space. Then it went
2008.
2008. Then it went to the Vibe Gallery. Then it went to Croatia. And then after that, Autograph started to collect. Was interested in Syd's photographs, and then they included some in their archive. And it was when Mark really studied Syd's photographs, he said, I think this is a book. And then we did the book first, really, and Mark and I were editing the book and working with Syd. And of course, sorry if that sounded weird. And then I can't remember where Mark phoned us really late one night, about 9
Sunday
o'clock.
night.
It was a Sunday night at like 9 o'clock at night. And he said, I've just thought, let's just do an exhibition. And we put this exhibition together in 6 weeks. It was just like mad. And then it just went crazy. I mean, each venue that we've shown the exhibition, since Chelsea Space, it's just more and more people have almost kind of come out and said, I was part of this and I've got this story to tell, and then other people have been adding their material and their archives and their voices. And in my head, it's kind of taken on its own, the exhibition's taken on its own life, it's just kind of got a life of its own. So coming to see it here, I'm just about to finish, coming to see it here and seeing the material that's connected with people's lives in Scotland, and their activist lives, again, expands that story. So it really started off with this very small exhibition in Chelsea Space, and has just gone on to something quite big, really, which is kind of, I keep backing away and saying, yeah, here it is, but it's I think it's been quite overwhelming and quite moving, because it still has, very worryingly, still has great importance and potency. Yeah, it's something that happened between 1976 and 1981. That's it.
Yeah, it's interesting what Carol talks about, finding this work from my archive. And Mark Seeley, who's the co-curator, he said in the introduction to the book, or in his preface to the book, I think it is, he said that the history of photography is littered with archives lying in distress, waiting for cultural agents to enunciate their worth. And I think Carol and Mark were those cultural agents, and it's a big thank you to them that this exhibition actually exists. But I think I want to say something about the similarities in some ways, and also the differences between 1976, 77, when Rock Against Racism really started, and now. And I'd been living for 4 years working as a photojournalist in Australia, in Sydney. And I came back to England and was really quite surprised that how normal racism had become. It had become normalised. It had become the sort of, what David Widgery described as the sort of land of the four-pint family fascist. You know, it was quite normal to openly speak about, to come out with racist slogans. We had the black and white minstrel show on primetime Saturday night television when we only had 3 channels, remember. So everybody watched this. We had comedians who used black and Asian people and Irish people, most important to remember that as well, as the butt of dumb jokes constantly on television. We had the National Front gaining electoral respectability and getting quite large votes in local council elections in particular, and we had them marching on the high streets and intimidating people throughout the country. So we were there was quite a serious situation, and one event in particular, which I was not involved with, I actually got involved a little bit later, triggered the setting up of Rock Against Racism, and that was an outburst at a concert in Birmingham by Eric Clapton, who shouted out stuff about send the wogs back. Enoch Powell was right, and this is the man who had made his entire career out of black music. He had at that time a hit #1 with Who Shot the Sheriff, Bob Marley's great song. And Red Saunders, a photographer and activist, wrote a letter to the music press. So he was so outraged by this speech when he heard about it of Eric Clapton's, calling for a rank and file movement around the slogan "Rock Against Racism." And he ended the letter by saying, "Who shot the sheriff, Eric? It sure as hell wasn't you." And the response was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Within the first week, I think there were 800 replies from musicians, from artists, from designers, architects, activists, a whole mixture of people saying, yeah, let's do it. Let's. And a movement was born as a result of that letter. I got involved almost immediately and met Red Saunders. We became friends and still are friends 40 years later. But it was to give you an idea of how bad things were getting. The early photographs over here, there's the early pictures of the clash, but there's one in particular which I want to talk about really, and that is the one in the corner there of the family, a mother and father and a young lad with the very nice wallpaper. This was a family called the Fosters, and they were a regular family living in Lewisham, well, in New Cross actually, which is next to Lewisham in London, and the lad in the photograph was 16 at the time. They were one of the victims of 21 houses that were raided in Lewisham as a part of the Metropolitan Police's so-called anti-mugging campaign. Mugging was the sort of radicalisation word, if you know what I mean, at that time. That was the word the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, the Evening Standard peddled day in, day out, and they caricatured particularly young black men, Afro-Caribbean men in particular, as muggers. If you were black and you were under 30, you were most likely to be a mugger. And they raided these houses with absolutely no evidence whatsoever, and they dragged 21 people off and locked them up in cells. And when I say raided houses, I'm not talking about gently knocking on the door and saying, "Hello, Mrs. Foster, is your son in?" It was smash the door down with a sledgehammer and take the kids away, you know. And it was David Foster, the young lad's father on the right there. He became the leader of the Lewisham 21 Defence Committee. And their front room, that photograph's taken in, was the headquarters of that committee. And it was the start of a resistance. It was people had had enough. They were sick of it. And just to illustrate how racist the police were at that time, the code name for the operation of those raids was Operation Nigger Hunt. So it gives you an idea of what we were dealing with. And the National Front, who in their evil ways decided to capitalise on this anti-mugging and organise the anti-mugging march, which was to march through Lewisham. But there was a fantastic resistance which had been built up in places like Wood Green, in Walsall, in Birmingham, all over the country, in the street fights against the National Front. And there was a massive counter-demonstration organised, which of all these pictures here represent, right up to here. And that counter-demonstration was what we called the anti-mugging march. And one of my particular favourites is this one here of activist Darcus Howe, who was stood on the toilet block of Clifton Rise. We had public toilets in those days. We don't anymore in London, that's for sure. And he always says, or in recent years has said, that David Widgery, who was a RAR activist, gave him the microphone and said, Darcus, say something. And I was fortunately in the right position with I think a 135 lens, which is a slight telephoto, and to get that shot which framed him behind the block of flats, which I often go past on the train. They're still there. But it was a fantastic day, and it was a day which was significant in all sorts of ways. Firstly, the counter-demonstration was massive. There was maybe 10,000 people in the counter-demonstration, which the National Front demonstration was small, a few hundred, maybe 200 at most. But the Metropolitan Police employed their entire mounted division to make sure that they could forge a way through the crowd, and which was a pretty terrifying experience, I can tell you, because they charged with their horses to make way for this motley bunch of NFers. You can see some here who had received a few blows from bricks and bottles and scaffold poles, which the whole demonstration threw at them. Quickly, the police busted the National Front. They had coaches waiting for them out of the area, and they were gone within an hour of them marching. But the battle with the police went on for the whole day, way until it started to get dark. And it was significant because it was the day that the Metropolitan Police became militarised. We'd never seen riot shields in mainland Britain. They'd been in Northern Ireland, but not in mainland Britain up to that point. So it was a very significant shift, and it gave the police the opportunity to see how it was a practice run for them to see how they could handle urban unrest on a large scale. And the battle did go for the whole day. I think we had a lot of victories. I mean, they were very, but there were a lot of people arrested, and a lot of people paid a heavy price for that day too. But it did have significance in the sense that it mobilised people. It mobilised people on the left to start and get together and establish the Anti-Nazi League, which up to that point hadn't existed. And that became an organisation which Rock Against Racism could work with, and we worked with alongside them. We didn't always agree, and we had plenty of sort of disagreements, but we realised at that time, now I'm skipping a lot of the pictures because I'm now going into this area which we call the Summer of Carnivals. We decided that we were doing gigs and we were putting on gigs. And remember, as I'm sure a lot of you do, is that we were very lucky that two genres of music were prevalent at that time and were really forging new ideas, and that was punk and reggae. And they were both musics which were developed in the urban centres throughout the country, like Glasgow. And they were both rebel musics. And the music industry was in a point of sort of flux. It wasn't sure exactly where it stood at that particular time. It was, and it didn't know how it was to respond to punk and UK reggae. And it gave us an opportunity to bring these two musics together. And for the first time, really, on a large scale, to put black and white bands together on the same bill. And we always had and we saw that as in itself as a political act. It was a theatrical politics, if you like, and we didn't need to augment it with slogans of "Smash the National Front." It was a significant theatrical event of important proportions. But we decided we wanted to do something more than just gigs at venues throughout the country. We wanted to do something which was an activist spectacular, if you like, and we had this idea. Because we'd always been, most of us involved in Rock Against Racism in London, had gone to the Notting Hill Carnival every year, which is where we'd first heard reggae and got to know people like Aswad, bands like Aswad, and got involved in the Rock Against Racism committee from early days. And so we called it Carnival because we wanted to link with the Notting Hill Carnival, which had also been an opportunity the police had seen to oppress people. They'd seen it as a means by which they could attack the black community. And it always ended in a fight in the recent years up to 1977. And we approached the Anti-Nazi League, who had a much more financial stability, if you like, than we did, and much more influence with the trades union movement where they could raise money, to put on this carnival. And I remember very well going to a meeting and they said, yeah, we'll get a big flatbed truck and put a band on the truck. And I remember we all went, no, we want to do a radical Woodstock. We don't want a truck, we want a stage with a proper PA, and we want to do this, but we also want to do a march. And as I was talking to someone earlier today, who said they didn't even realise they'd marched 7 miles, but we put on a march from Trafalgar Square to Victoria Park, which is in the East End of London, and it's 7 miles. It was a very long march. And everybody said to us, we expected to get 20,000 people, I think, that's something of that order. And people said, no, most people they'll go to see The Clash, or they'll go to see X-Ray Specs or Steel Pulse, or whoever their favourite band was. They won't go on the march, but they did. And I lived in just off Trafalgar Square at that time, and went down to Trafalgar Square very early in the morning. And by 7 o'clock in the morning, there was 10,000 people rocking, and they're singing. Thousands of people sing If You're Glad to Be Gay in Trafalgar Square. I mean, can you imagine that in 1978, which was absolutely brilliant. And I must say, at 7 o'clock in the morning, the majority of people in Trafalgar Square were Scottish, which was which was quite interesting. But by 11, I think it was 11, the march set off, there was 100,000 people. And this picture here on the wall here is a little bit of that crowd, but and the one of Paul Simon and The Clash is that all of that day. It was a phenomenal success. And it was a carnival. It wasn't a protest march in the way we normally think of protest marches. We organised flatbed trucks. We took the idea from the Anti-Nazi League of the flatbed trucks, and we hired 7 of them. We had bands like Misty in Roots, the Piranhas from Brighton, the Ruts, playing on the back of trucks all the way. So it was a dancing, rocking, crazy carnival of people. I haven't been able to find it, but there was a report in the Daily Telegraph the next day saying this was, where have this degenerate group of thousands come from? What has happened to our country that's been taken over by this filthy, purple-haired and dreadlocked people? And they were absolutely horrified. But it was an extraordinary day, and it was a day. It did spark the whole summer. There were carnivals in Manchester. I don't know what year the Edinburgh Carnival, which was on, but probably the same year. Yeah, so they're all taking place in this year. The second carnival, which had its own significance, because that was in Brixton. And again, we marched from central London to Brixton. But this photo here of Jimmy Percy is one which I'd like to tell the story, because it was, for me, a very significant picture. Because Jimmy Percy was the lead singer of a band called Sham 69. And a few days before this, we put on a gig, there's a picture of it somewhere in here, at Central London Poly with Sham 69 and Misty in Roots. And we were warned that and Sham had a following, I don't mean totally, but they had something of a following of some racist skinheads, and they'd attracted this really horrible group of people, and we were told that they were going to trash the gig. And it was a really tense gig, and I remember there was a whole posse of people from Southall who lined the front of the stage, and they were defeated. They couldn't get onto the stage, which is what they tried to do. But afterwards, Sham 69 and Jimmy Percy in particular were threatened with death threats, and they said, if you do, there's a poster out there for this carnival, in fact there's 2, and they said, if you do the gig, we'll kill you. And we were told we had to take this seriously. And Jimmy was not a sort of shy, retiring type of guy. He was actually really very scared. And so we quickly, at last minute, Stiff Little Fingers stepped in to take the slot which Sham 69 were going to play. But in the middle of the gig, it was, I was changing film. I think Aswad had just played, and I was changing my films. In those days, you had to sort of grab any minute to reload your cameras. And you'd got 36 shots, and that was it in each camera before the time ran out. And suddenly, the back of the stage, the big gate opened, and Jimmy charged past me and raced to the front of the stage. And I thought, what the hell is he doing? And he stood on the stage and made this fantastic speech, great anti-racist speech, and denouncing any racist who supported Sham 69. And then he turned round, and I was right behind him, and we can see the sort of angst in his forehead. You know? And I knew that I had to get this shot. It was one of those, I've always said this, it was, as Henri Cartier-Bresson would have said, a decisive moment, but it was also a decisive anti-racist moment. So it was a dual decisive moment, because it really was the moment that Sham abandoned the racist supporters. And it was, again, technology being the way it was in those days, I was totally unsure whether I'd actually got it in focus, got the shot, whether the exposure was right. You work so quickly in those situations, you just go, but there's nothing automatic about the cameras that I was using then. You have to make those sort of choices. So I can remember being very excited to get to the darkroom and process the film. So that was an important picture for me, because it was a turning point. It was a point where how can I put it? I think that was a point where we started to celebrate a victory against the National Front. It was that year their electoral success plummeted dramatically, and we realised that it was a point where we were capable of actually having an effect, to change things, to make a difference. And the next thing I would like to talk about is there's a few pictures, but there's a couple there of Northern Ireland, and this was the argument against racism against Ireland was a difficult one to put, because we were in the middle of an IRA bombing campaign. The Troubles were at their height in Belfast, and it meant that it was very difficult for people to put the arguments against racism against Irish people. And so I went on 3 occasions, I think, to Northern Ireland to just photograph amidst the Troubles, not the Troubles, but to photograph the people, to humanise and give a face, if you like, to the people who lived in Belfast. And we always, in temporary hoarding, which is an example of here, we always featured some sort of story about Northern Ireland. One of the things which we don't have in the exhibition, but we did get, was an incredible letter later on from one of the hunger strikers, written on a cigarette paper in the most minute writing, and smuggled out of the H blocks. And it was interesting, because one of the ways I work is just walking around the streets, and the response walking around the streets wearing a Rock Against Racism badge was in West Belfast was very much that we were on the same side, and I was always met with incredible generosity and kindness from people in Northern Ireland. There's another picture over there, that woman was talking at me, which is I like very much as a photograph, because the camera's become invisible. She was just talking, and she got so animated about talking she'd forgotten I was photographing, and I got a big Nikon with a motor drive on straight in her face, but I'd gone. She was and it worked as a photograph. Maybe now we should go into the other room, and I can tell you something about the next little phase, but if it's not getting too boring. This room is a mixture of things, but quite a lot of the images in this room are centered around our next sort of idea, if you like, after the summer of the Carnivals. And our next idea was to do a sort of circus act, if you like, a show which travelled around the country, including coming to Scotland, which I didn't get up to that bit. I think I'd run out of money by then. But the idea was we would do a tour where we would take 3 bands and then pick up a local band and travel around the country. And we booked venues throughout the country. And we called this the Militant Entertainment Tour. I saw someone had a badge on with the Militant Entertainment Tour earlier. Yeah, yeah. Because we adopted the little blue badge there with the rhinoceros. We adopted as our logo was a rhinoceros because it's 20 tons was unstoppable, and that was our idea of using the rhinoceros. But lots of these pictures are from all over. That one's from Sheffield, that one's from Leicester, that one's from Leeds, that one's from Coventry, I think. That one's from Alexandra Palace. That one's from West Runton Pavilion in Cromer. That in some ways is... and it was a fantastic, crazy adventure in a way. And we went to places where... one of the stories which I always amused at, because I'll never forget, was I think the second gig in, we went to Leicester and we stayed at, I think it was a Holiday Inn. And Misty and Roots insisted on having their ITEL chef to cook for them. And he was called Simbar, and he was 6'8", and with long, long dreadlocks. And he had all these special pans, and he came in, this man, 6'8", and dreadlocks, and walked into the kitchen. And all these people turned around and looked at him and went, "I Sinbar." And they all went, "Oh!" It was full of crazy incidents like that, the whole tour. We had a brilliant time, I must say. It was great fun. But this one here of this girl is one. It sort of typified the whole tour in a way, because it was... There's one idea of punk, which is it's the sort of Vivienne Westwood, Malcolm McLaren, King's Road idea of punk. But this, for me, was the real punk. This was, in a place called Cromer, which is in the north of Norfolk. And it was a place called the West Runton Pavilion, which was really a massive, great shed close to the beach. And when we got there, we drove up from London, and it was, I think, 7 hours drive. It was a long drive. We got there was absolutely nobody there, and nothing there. The bands arrived, Misty, Ruts, Gang of Four, and they all started sound checking. And we went, "This is going to be a disaster. There's no queue outside, nobody's coming." And suddenly all these double-decker buses from Norwich and all the surrounding districts came over the headland, and they all parked up row after row of double-deckers, and everybody got out, went to the gig, stayed for the whole gig, then piled back onto the buses, and off they went back to wherever they came from. And I remember seeing that girl get on the stage and do that pose, and it was another of those, I suppose, decisive moments. So, and adrenaline kicked in, and I climbed over people's heads. I knew I'd got to get the shot, and, with 2 Nikons and a flash unit and a bag of lenses, and got on the stage. And you can see just a little bit on the left of Foxy's guitar, I think it is, from the Ruts, and the Ruts were playing. And I got the shot. And the next second I was in the air, landed camera first on the ground. But it was another one of those where I remember driving back, getting home at 7 o'clock in the morning and going straight into the darkroom to make sure I'd got that photograph. Recently, The Guardian did a little thing on my favourite shot, and I chose that one because it was such a, for me, an important photograph, and it summed up the spirit of punk and the spirit of an excitement. And interestingly, just... Mark Seeley from Autograph, when someone asked him what was his favourite photograph in this exhibition, he chose that one, largely because he used to go to punk gigs as the only black person in the gig, and this young woman on the left here, he says is him, which I thought was a nice way of putting it. But interestingly, the New York Times ran a review about the exhibition when it was in Bradford, and the brother of that woman saw the picture and said, "That's my sister." And he contacted her, and she acknowledged that it actually was her. And she's the director of National Museum of Barbados, which is quite incredible. So, it's, but I think the Militant Entertainment Tour gave us an opportunity to take RAW everywhere. And you have to remember, as a lot of you I know, because I've spoken to quite a few people who were involved in Rock Against Racism, it was a DIY organisation. We didn't have a hierarchy. I mean, we in London had the bank account and produced the badges and temporary hoarding. But really, anybody who wanted to pick up the idea there was no rules. As you saw in the entrance hall, there's a thing called the gig guide. And we did have a means of trying to explain to people how to do it, but really you could do whatever you wanted. It was not a political party. I've often said that for me it had more in kin with the Dadaists in Zurich than it did with a political party. It was anarchic to that extent. But after the Militant Entertainment Tour, these are all from the Militant Entertainment Tour as well. Some of these ones here, the one of Joe Strummer and the one of Aswad next to it, are two really important gigs which we did, which we had never done before in Rock Against Racism, and that is that we used as a means of raising money. Because in Southall in 1979, the National Front organised a meeting, and the police, again, were off the leash. And that's the time when they killed Blair Peach. They beat senselessly lots of people. 70 people were in hospital. 700 people were arrested. Clarence Baker, who was the last person with the dreadlocks on that picture there, was in hospital in a coma with blood clot on his brain. He was the manager of Misty in Roots. The People Unite headquarters, People Unite were Misty in Roots and the Ruts. And they had a small record label and a recording studio in a squat. The police ordered them out, and as they went out, everybody went out, they beat them senseless with truncheons in a corridor. It was a police riot, and we had to raise money quickly for the 700 who were arrested for their court cases. So we did a benefit gig, which was the only one we ever did in Rock Against Racism. And we did two nights at the Rainbow. And everybody, fortunately, every band you can think of wanted to do it. And we had Pete Townsend, The Clash, The Ruts, The Members, the Pop Group, Aswad, Misty in Roots, and I think the Cimarrons did it as well. And there were two amazing sell-out nights, and we raised enough money for the court cases. But normally that was not the way Rock Against Racism operated. We generally always insisted the bands were paid musicians' union rates, and that they were treated as professionals as well as supporters of Rock Against Racism. The last ones, and I'll finish on this because I've been going on a bit. The last ones I think which are important are the emergence, and that's some of these pictures over here. One of the specials, the second one, was the last Carnival. It was also the last ever specials gig with Jerry Dammers, at least. I mean, I know they've reformed in recent years, but and that was a carnival which I was not involved in organising, but I did photograph, and that was the Leeds Carnival against the Nazis in 1981. And it was really when Two Tone had taken up the baton from Rock Against Racism, and they carried on. And as Jerry Dammers has often said, it was a relay. Ra started had 5 years of it. We then took it over, and it continued. But also by then, bands were multicultural and multiracial. And that was a fantastic gig with the specials. And this is the B to another one of the Two Tone bands. And I think by then we'd run out. We'd been doing this for 5 years, and we'd been doing it as we were exhausted. We needed a break. Some of us, like myself, have got young kids. Red Sworders have got a daughter same age as my daughter. We all suddenly realised we had to do something else with our lives as well. We had to think about maybe finding somewhere to live rather than in squats. So I think it was an idea which had run its course, that it also made its mark. It had set up and the idea. I mean, remember when Rock Against Racism started, in the then first division in football, I think there was one black player, Laurie Cunningham. When Rock Against Racism finished, every team in the Premiership had black players playing for them. It's a mark of the way in which, in those 5 years, things had changed. That's not saying we can now be complacent and say everything's cool, because racism shifts its sands. It moves in different directions, finds new outlets. And as we started this process in the first big recession since the Second World War, we're now in another recession. And we're now into a new era of blame culture. We're now trying to find, or not we're not trying to find, but they're trying to find new scapegoats. And Islamophobia, homophobia, sexism are now well back on the agenda. And we have to keep the fight going. It's not going to end. And that's it, really.